So when we started Fountainhead, we bought the house. The house is across the street from our house, and we said, we're just going to invite artists, and we reached out. We reached out to the museums and the nonprofits and said, we can host your artists, because at that time the museums were very different than they are today. Pam didn't exist; it was Ma'am. ICA didn't exist, and the MoCA was here, Bass was here, Frost, and all of these museums, but they didn't have the budgets that they have now. So we said, we can host the artist for you, which obviously takes an expense off the institution, and then they can potentially stay longer, right? Because you now don't have that cost, and then maybe you can do more talks, and more people can interact with the artists as opposed to them just kind of flying in, installing the show, having that opening night, and then leave. So those were the two things that we did, and we host Locust Projects, an alternative art space. Their artists were coming and living in the back of a warehouse in Wynwood before Wynwood was Wynwood, when it was actually dangerous, right? So and then also, as we continued, more galleries started opening up. So young galleries started opening up. We're like, wow, we should support the galleries too. So we started flying in and hosting the artists for the younger galleries that were opening up, and then just inviting people. And so, and in the beginning, we said you could stay up to 2 months. So there was this constant, turnover of people. Literally, an artist would leave in the morning and somebody else would arrive. Sometimes they would actually overlap, but the bedrooms were just like, and it was a tremendous amount of fun. But at the same time, the house was never clean. You know what I mean? You tell people that they need to clean up and
Artists.
leave the room how it started, and it just never happened. And then also so we also started to do things with the artists, right? So at first we were just like, yeah, come, you can hang out. We'll hang out. We'll go to openings. We'll go to museums.
And at that point, they're doing so. It's just free place to stay. No other terms.
We really weren't. Yeah, place to live, create. They have studios, but no other terms and no sort of formal programming. And then then when we started doing kind of the same things and seeing how it affected the artist's time there. It became more, it became more valuable. So we learned that, going to these cultural institutions and learning about Miami and gaining inspiration from the sights, sounds, smells, people, energy of this city was valuable. So we're like, okay, we need to make sure that we do these things for each artist. And we realized that, you can't really do that when you have people constantly coming and going, right? Because it just doesn't work, because somebody might not slot into the day that you go to the Everglades. You know what I mean? So then we're like, okay, we need to formalize when people arrive and when people leave. So that's when we started to say, okay, it's 1 month, because that's when we saw that was kind of the average of how long people stayed. So okay, we're now going to do a month, and it's going to start at the beginning of the month and end at the end of the month. And we're going to have this kind of cultural immersion. And then we started just inviting curators and gallery owners over to meet one-on-one with the artists. And we learned that was a mutually beneficial situation as well, because the curators and the galleries could meet all of these new artists that they just wouldn't have otherwise met, because they wouldn't have time, to fly around the world, and it'd be expensive to fly around the world, and they actually had jobs that they had to do, right? So to take an hour or two out of 1 day a month, it was valuable to the curators and the historians and the gallery owners, and it was valuable to the artists because they gave a unique perspective, and they were also able to ask questions go behind the curtain to find out, what it is like to own a gallery, and ask them questions that they maybe couldn't ask of their own gallery if they had one. So then we started to incorporate the studio visits, and we saw that was a really impactful part. And then then, people would come in and they'd see the work, and our, collectors would come and be like, this is amazing being able to see the work that was created here. And then we're like, oh, so maybe we should pick a day and let people come and see the artwork, and host something. So that's what led to the open houses. And then, everything just kind of evolved. So then we started the open houses, and then.
And at this point, is it self-funded? Are you fundraising?
No, at this point, it's Dan and I are just doing it.
Mm-hmm.
So
Still working.
We're still working. We're both working full time.
And do you think that that's an important element to exploring your purpose, your passion, to have a way to actually make ends meet, to have cash coming in to sort of balance out the
in my
risk?
opinion, yes. But that's the path that I took. It also, I learned like one fed the other in a very different way. I feel like I was also very focused on purpose and the value that we delivered to the artists that were coming, in a way that maybe if it was somebody else's money, I wouldn't have. I don't know. Maybe I wouldn't in the beginning. I wouldn't have thought as much about it. I'd like to think that I would, but it was like, no. If I'm going to do this, if we're going to invest our money that we've worked very hard to make, this has got to be. It's got to be good for the artists. Like, this has to value them.
That's the real product that you're offering.
Exactly. Yeah, because if the artists don't feel it's valuable, then why am I doing it?
Right.
So I do think it's important. It focuses you.
And how would you say that it impacted your normal work?
I think I don't know. I was so alive. Like, it didn't. I don't. Yeah. I didn't. I think it impacted, and we had young kids. I think it. I don't know. It just all was like. Just the tremendous bundle of energy that caused everything to vibrate.
So cool. And if you were just in that corporate space without this element, you would think to yourself, oh, stuff's fine or stuff's not fine. But it was this whole new X factor brought in, giving you this new energy about both.
Absolutely. That's what I think. I really think they all fed one another. And then, and then also raising our children. For our children to see all of these artists from around the world and hear how they think and how they act and how they dress and what they're interested in, what they're reading, what they're listening to. That was so we'll see how it ultimately affects Golden Sky. But I think it's good. I always say, if nothing else, we've raised two very open-minded kids. But yeah, I do. At least in my case, I do think it was important to have first, put our own money into it. And there were times when that actually was, not easy. When we had, I remember one time it was a tough year, and the residency cost far more than we made, and we said to the kids, we're like, okay, so, it's we're always open with our kids about money, and we said, it's been a little challenging, and so if we don't, if Christmas is a little different this year, but it means we can continue the residency, or we could maybe rethink what we're doing at the residency, to have the Christmas presents.
Right.
It wasn't just about the Christmas presents. It was just the time. That was something that we could put it in, the kids could understand, mm-hmm. right? And without hesitation, both the kids were like, oh, of course we have to continue the residency. Who cares about presents? Wow. And I was like, whoa. That's a moment I will never forget.
Gives me goosebumps.
Yeah, it's a moment I will never forget. That's when I knew that, all of these different things, and remember, and I really was, and Dan really was there for the kids too. That they're ultimately why we're here. But so yeah, I do think initially it's important to do on your own.
And so you start having these monthly gatherings in which all these wonderful people from around Miami and people who are visiting from out of town come in. And these gatherings are so fun. Anytime I have someone visiting, when it happens to fall on a residency, I bring them because for me, it's the perfect microcosm of Miami. Because they meet so many different kinds of people. Everyone's so interesting, and everyone's just relaxed and having a really nice time. There's now a donation cash flow coming in.
Yeah. Oh, yeah. I didn't go back to the business.
Yeah. So walk me back to how you piece together the sustainability financial.
Right. So, so we did get to a point where we're like, okay, the kids are going to have to go to college soon. Like, we have some big expenses coming up, and ultimately it got to the point where, truthfully, the residency was, it was no longer just a passion project. It was a respected program, right? And I knew that if it was going to grow, it would grow beyond something that, one, we could financially sustain, and two, I was starting to get to the point where I wasn't that vibration was starting to break down.
Right. Is that a nervy feeling? Because you create this something beautiful, and then suddenly you're starting to lose a little bit of the passion.
Absolutely.
What's going through your mind?
You're just starting to sweat.
Right.
You're just
Grind.
I can't do. I'm just waking up, getting things done, and going to bed. I'm not feeling it anymore. And this was true. I was starting to become I was feeling more like a machine than a human being. And that's when I was like, okay, something has to give. Something has to give. I'm certainly not going to give up being a mom. And so it's Fountainhead or it's my job. And it probably it took a year and a half, if not 2 years, to kind of go through that thought process and make a decision and talk to a lot of people.
What was most helpful in that thought process for you in hindsight, other than the fact that it was a long period of time?
I think duration was part of it, right? I just think I talked to a lot of people. I learned I don't think there was any one thing. It's just I just kept asking questions of people that I respected and admired about how they saw it from the outside, right? And then things that they had done themselves that helped them to make decisions like this. So I don't think it was any one thing. It was just a culmination of a lot of conversations, a lot of listening, a lot of asking questions.
And you're hearing people say the same thing a couple times. You're like, oh, maybe they're onto something.
Yeah, and so then when I made the decision to turn it into a nonprofit, well, then I was like, okay, and for it eventually to be my job, to make the transition, then I had to think about, well, how exactly do I do that? I've never run a nonprofit before. I've had my own business. So I just was like, well, wait a second. I just have to think about this as a business, very simply. It's a business that doesn't make a profit, but it's still a business.
And you knew you had to build it because you loved it.
Yeah.
You're just loving it.
Yeah. So it was like, okay, well, just put your business hat on and build a business. You have revenue and you have expenses. Where's the revenue coming from? And so, the first thing I did was go to 3 of the major, actually at that point, George didn't have a foundation, but people that were very supportive and coming and getting excited about things that also had means. So I went to George Perez, Alberto Ibargüen from the Knight Foundation, and oh my goodness, his name is flying from my brain, the president of the Miami Foundation. I went to the 3 of them and said, if I were to turn this into a nonprofit, would you help me with, would you fund me? And they all said yes.
Was that a scary process?
Of course.
Why?
Well, because, one, it's 3 powerful men. and I'm doing something that, like, again, in my head, I have no education for this, right? So that's something that I've always kind of, I always have this little, like, thing inside me that says, but you don't have a degree for this, you don't have an education for this, like on paper. But for me, I still have that, but I know that the way I learn is by doing. It's not by going to a classroom. But so yeah, it was very intimidating. But I go back to, like, but I went back to, honestly, I went back to, like, what I learned in the car business, and that was, like, you just go in with, like, if you believe in yourself, you educate your, like, I mean, this isn't from the car thing. You go in and believe in yourself. You believe in what you're selling. Like, I could never sell ice to Eskimos unless they needed to build a house or something. Like, I always believed in whatever it was that I was selling. So if I believe in this, and I know for a fact that these three gentlemen believe in the value of the arts, then this is a win-win situation for everyone. Like, I know it is. So I went in, it was intimidating, but I went in knowing that I could create a win-win situation.
That energy walking into a meeting is so powerful.
Yeah.
And you also had these relationships with these people already that was based not on trying to sell them something.
Exactly.
It was based on your respect
Right.
and common appreciations. And I think that you said you're in the business of, like, connecting people. That was the investment over time that gave you this unique chance to walk into the office and present.
And also, and you asked about, if doing it, with doing it on your own matters. It does, because I could also say, like, I've put our family's income to this for almost 10 years at this point, like, so there was some backup to what I was saying, but it was really about just knowing that I could, us coming together created something that was valuable for the people and the community that we cared about.
Love that. So they all said, we're with you.
Yes, they all said they're with me.
And so that was now an income stream.
Right. And then, so I started the 501c3 paperwork, and then I started going to other friends that were collectors and interested in art to build the board. And that became another revenue stream, but also a stream of people of great minds that could also help me build the organization, right?
Did you find yourself practicing, getting better at sharing the vision?
Absolutely, yeah.
Didn't have it perfect right at the beginning?
Oh, gosh, no. I probably still don't have it perfect.
But isn't it interesting how you share it over and over again, almost like a comedian telling a joke? Yeah. You learn some parts hit, you learn people don't understand some parts, right?
Well, and that's part of what we do at Fountainhead with the artists. Like, part of those studio visits and the open house and bringing people by is that they're talking about their work with all of the different kind of professionals and influences within the art world. Mm-hmm. And so they're doing exactly the same thing. They're seeing what hits, and what hits with a curator might not hit with a collector or a gallery. Like, you just keep saying it, and it's just like each time, you see what hits, but also the people in the room react to things, and they actually give you new words that you hadn't even thought of, right? So it just keeps evolving and tightening and, like, coming together.
And so the residency, there's 3 rooms, at least that's the current version. There's 3 studios, and each has an artist, and you go and you basically hear the spiel, and you can ask questions, and they're giving the spiel over and over again all night, right? For the first time, I'm guessing. At such intervals?
I would say, well, it's not really intervals though, right? Because somebody comes in and it's like start over or skip ahead.
Or go off on a whole new tangent.
Yes, it's definitely, the open house is definitely something very unique, because it's different than an opening at a gallery, because at the open house, literally everybody walking in that home wants to hear what you have to say.
Mm-hmm.
They're not just there to look at the work. They really are there to meet the artist
Mm-hmm.
and understand their work. So it's a very unique evening. And I mean, the artists at the end of the night are always like, wow.
I need a drink.
That was a lot.
Wow.
But in a good way.
In the best way possible. And I find, because I'm the non-artist, people oftentimes they ask me, like, are you an artist?
Yeah.
And you know what I started telling them now? Emerging.
I love that.
But I'll ask a question that's like maybe sounds silly or stupid.
But nothing silly and
But
stupid.
that's the environment that you created that gives me comfort or confidence to ask what might be considered a silly question. I know in other environments, more snooty art environments, people would look down on that.
Yeah. Well, that was the most important thing. I would say that was one of the most, if not the most important thing when we created Fountainhead, was that it had to be everything that drew us to the art world that wasn't what people thought of the art world. Like, because the other reason why we loved it is we did have gallery owners and museum curators and historians like help us along the way. Like, they took us under their wing. And so the kind of snooty, barrier-driven art world that a lot of people experience and absolutely exists, we were lucky enough not to have here in Miami. And I think Miami was a big part of that. Like, I think the fact that we were in Miami really influenced that, because Miami was small and growing, and like everybody was supporting one another. You went to events, and you had everybody within the arts ecosystem in the same room, because one wanted the other to succeed, and you worked together to make that happen. So that was the art world that I knew, right? And so that was the organization that I wanted to create. It had to have that welcomingness to it. And that's why we opened it in a house. And that's why there's 3 artists. Like, that home, that number was very intentional from the start, because 3 is my favorite number, but like 3 is a number where you feel like a group, but you can go everywhere and do everything together. Like, you're not that big. You can fit in a car. You can still get a regular dinner reservation. You know what I mean? Like, you're very movable and you're very intimate. Like, you can have real conversations without talking over one another, also without feeling like you're sharing too much with too many. It's just this great number. And a home creates this welcoming environment. People feel good walking into a home. It's just a different feeling when you walk into a gallery or a museum. Frankly, smaller. Sometimes, that helps.
Mm-hmm.
Just the size helps people to feel welcome. But also, it's in a neighborhood. It's lush, and there's you're surrounded by Miami's nature. All of those things create this welcoming environment. And then when you yourself like hug people and welcome them with a smile, they feel it. And then they end up doing the same thing.
Right.
Then they end up greeting somebody with a smile and a hug, and it just builds.
Join our creative business community at HereGoesNothin.com.